What happened to Flukeman after the finale of The X-Files Season 2, Episode 2? How did he actually come to be? Was it ever a human? And what interesting details revealing the nature of Flukeman are there in the series and the spin-off comic? This video answers these and other interesting questions related to The X-Files. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and support the video with your activity. This means a lot for me. For us, the viewers, this story began on an old Russian freighter ship a few miles off the coast of New Jersey. An emergency situation occurred there. There was some kind of clogging in the internal water supply system of the vessel, and the youngest engineer, called Dmitry, was assigned to clean the system. Dmitry tries to figure out the cause of the contamination, and suddenly something grabs him from the water. Something that looks like a human but definitely isn't one in the conventional sense. After Dmitry's disappearance, one of the ship's crew members gives the command to flush the tanks. To jump ahead, this meant that the water, along with unfortunate Dmitry and whatever grabbed him, was dumped into the ocean. At the moment, the ship was not far from the emergency water discharge systems of Newark's wastewater treatment plant. This is how the creature and the victim's body ended up in Newark sewers. At first, Agent Mulder, sent to investigate Dmitry's murder, noting that the victim's identity was initially unknown to him, doesn't pay much attention to the case, considering it a common situation. However, Scully will proceed to convince him otherwise. Scully starts with what she does best, an autopsy. She cannot determine the exact cause of the victim's death, although didn't he simply drown first? But that's not the point. The point is that in the bile duct she discovers a fluke. She identifies it as turbularia, or a fluke, or simply a flatworm. This is a parasitic organism that feeds on the liver of its host. Trematodes prefer an unsanitary living environment. At first, Mulder and Scully believe that the parasite entered the host's body in the sewer, possibly even after his death. Scully doubts that such a parasite could kill a person, but there was something else. Before meeting with Scully, Mulder spoke to a guy who had been attacked in the sewer, presumably by a large animal similar to a python. Overall, the guy feels okay except for a strange taste in his mouth, but there's a wound on his back that resembles a bite from a huge fluke. After all, parasitic flukes have a scolex. This is what their head part with a sucker mouth equipped with several hooks is called, and this injury surprisingly resembles an imprint of exactly such scolex. However, at the beginning, Mulder and Scully understandably find the idea of a giant blood-sucking fluke absurd, yet we as viewers are fully convinced that such a parasite in a human body can indeed kill. The second victim will die shortly after the fluke leaves his body. Soon, Mulder arrives at Newark County sewage processing plant, where the most interesting part begins. By chance, the creature is locked in one of the pipes with a closed valve. One horrifying creature which killed Dmitry, whose scolex we can now see in all its glory. Meanwhile, Scully is gathering new information about parasitic flatworms, which helps shed more light on the nature of our monster of the week, as all of this directly relates to it, although Scully herself doesn't know that yet. In particular, the following: our monster can thrive not only in the unsanitary environment of the sewers, but also in clean water and seawater. It's hermaphroditic with a complex system of self-fertilization. It can feed on scavenge, and most importantly, to complete its life cycle, it may need to change several hosts. We'll return to this later. Since X-Files division is officially closed at this point, the captured creature is placed in a psychiatric hospital. The creature huddles in a dark corner of the ward. It prefers darkness. Standing by the door, Scully and Mulder discuss its lack of sexual characteristics and its astonishing biological combination of primate and parasitic features. Interestingly, Scully here refers to its parasitic organs, probably the scolex, as rudimentary, although as we have already understood, they are in fact quite functional. The thing is that the agents understand that the creature is responsible for the deaths of 2 people, but they have not yet pieced together that the small flukes entered the hosts' bodies after they were bitten by this huge Flukeman. And they were completely unaware that a similar parasite was also present in the body of the second victim. During transportation, the creature will of course manage to free itself from its restraints and kill the driver. Physiological traits of a flatworm, in particular its body elasticity, will come in handy. It will also help it penetrate into the sewage truck tank. Here its body compresses to 16 inches in diameter. And now we understand that this is the skill that helped Flukeman remain undetected in Russian ship systems for a long time, until its unlucky position caused clogging. Yes, the creature turns out to be quite intelligent. Hiding in a toilet cubicle, it seemed to understand that a sewage truck was supposed to arrive here, which would again open it a path to the sea through the treatment facilities. Mulder will follow Flukeman's trail, and in their next conversation with Scully, one of the truths that's out there will be revealed. The small parasites inside the victims' bodies are nothing but the larval stage of Flukeman itself. Now Scully realizes that through bites, Flukeman implants its offspring into the bodies of its victims. And based on the information she collected earlier, for the completion of its life cycle, that is to become a mature Flukeman, the parasite may need to change several hosts. This means that the parasite that left the second victim's body likely started to look for another host since the previous one's body was exhausted to death. Flukeman will try to break out into the ocean, but Agent Mulder will manage to close the valve, cutting the creature in half, which of course won't kill it. Scully herself will later tell Mulder that based on her in-depth research on parasites, they can regenerate the same as other flukes. Scully identifies Flukeman as a quasi-vertebrate human. Nature cannot produce something like this. It is the work of humans. Scully and Mulder suppose that the creature made its way to the Russian cargo ship from Chernobyl. A crazy nuclear cocktail led to an abnormal fusion of DNA and suppression of natural genetic processes, which is what created this being. The story of Flukeman continues in the X-Files comic series X-Files Season 10. After the reopening of the X-Files division, Mulder and Scully head to Martha's Vineyard, where people have mysteriously begun to disappear during the beach season. And judging by the injuries on some of the victims' bodies, this is an echo of an old, not entirely closed case. Flukeman has survived and works on its reproduction much more thoroughly this time. It has learned to chain its hosts in the sewers, which surprises Mulder greatly. It has managed to produce a dozen of its kind, but there may be many more. Meanwhile, Scully gains access to the remains of the previous Flukeman, to be more precise, the lower half of its body. Just as she begins to perform an autopsy, the remains start to rapidly regenerate, growing back the upper part. Scully manages to destroy an almost complete Flukeman with acid. This means that Flukeman can reproduce not only by producing offspring, but also by regenerating itself from various body parts. It is possible that a significant share of its offspring was produced this exact way. As Scully mentions in the comic, a suitable host for reproduction may be 1 in 1,000. Interestingly, in the comic, fluke men have learned to walk, whereas in the series the monster could only crawl on the ground, which by the way added to its creepiness a great deal. This is not an evolutionary step for Flukeman, but rather a liberty taken by the author of the comic, as the lower part of the body that Scully was about to dissect can also stand on its feet. But the most interesting aspect of the comic is that it shows us Flukeman's origin. There's a theory that Flukeman used to be an ordinary person who underwent mutation, but this is not directly confirmed in the series. The comic explores a somewhat opposite idea. The story goes like this. Flukeman was born from a human body. Mikhail and Grigory were liquidators of the Chernobyl disaster in 1986. At the command of their superiors, Mikhail locks Grigory in a technological tunnel which was flooded with cooling water for the reactor. Grigory was left to die in a room filled with a lot of flatworms. And all of this led to what Scully was talking about, a devilish mixture of radiation and DNA from various species. Soon, looking at the corpse of his deceased comrade in horror, Mikhail will see a fluke crawling out of his nose. The very fluke that, after changing several hosts, will eventually become Flukeman. For a long time, Flukeman lived in a port from which ships carrying radioactive and other waste departed. That's how it eventually ended up on that very freight ship. Or actually, perhaps it lived there for a long time. Mikhail moved to the US and became a sheriff of Martha's Vineyard. He meets Mulder at the airport, and it is he who saves Mulder's life with his flamethrower when more than a dozen Flukemen attack Mulder all at once, infecting him with parasites. And all of this isn't some ridiculous coincidence. After that day in Chernobyl, Mikhail, who's now known as Michael, was waiting for punishment to come for him. He expected Grigory, whoever or whatever he had become, to appear in his life once again, and that's exactly what happened. One Flukeman survived and reached Mikhail at the end of the comic, clearly indicating that whatever this creature was, it remembered what happened back in 1986. Regarding this, Mulder will formulate a hypothesis that there is some sort of phantom connection between parasites and their hosts. The parasite born in Grigory's body retained part of its memories, and the parasite that likely remained in Mulder's body after the surgery performed by Scully allowed Mulder to see what happened at the moment of Mikhail's death. This suggests that Flukeman possess something like a hive mind, and it's not necessarily true that the Flukeman that killed Mikhail is the same one that was born before his eyes. Anyway, the story of Flukeman is not just a story of a nuclear cocktail and DNA. It's a story telling us that this case is sure to remain open for a long time. If you like this video, subscribe to the channel, give it a thumbs up and comment. It means a lot to me. Bye!